Ever wondered why your data models feel clunky even with the best intentions? You're not alone. Today, I'm showing where Copilot actually accelerates your Microsoft Fabric workflow and where it still needs a human touch. We'll identify the pressure points in data pipelines, highlight real Copilot use cases, and answer, can an AI assistant really turn your raw data into better insights faster? Stick around because the answers might completely shift your approach to data modeling from data dump to smart input, where Copilot starts working. If you've ever uploaded a spreadsheet to Microsoft Fabric and instantly regretted it, you're not alone. A lot of us assume that cleaning up data comes after the fact, that a little patience, some brute force, and a round or two with Excel formulas can fix the mess. But here's something that catches a lot of people off guard. Copilot doesn't wait for you to discover you've made a mess. It starts scanning your data the moment you connect it. This isn't just about checking for empty cells or odd dates. Copilot actually reviews the makeup of your source, picking apart structures, highlighting columns that don't line up, and flagging data types that are going to trip you up later. Most people miss these until they're halfway through building a pipeline that's already doomed. Copilot gets to it before that time sink even begins. Say you've brought in a CSV export from a third-party system. The column headers are inconsistent, some fields are mashed together, and worst of all, your dates are in 3 different formats. Instead of simply pointing out that something looks off, Copilot goes deeper. It calls out the structural problems, zeroing in on columns that exist in the schema but aren't accounted for in your import, or fields with mixed data types that Power BI will choke on down the line. What's more, Copilot doesn't just shrug its virtual shoulders and leave you to it. You'll get actionable recommendations, rename these headers for consistency, split out this nested column, standardize those date formats before you import. Picture connecting to an API for the first time, maybe a marketing tool with custom field names like annual sales USD in one table and sales USD in another. Where most people would only realize the mismatch after failing to join the tables, Copilot flags the mismatch up front and suggests unified naming, backed by its understanding of data relationships. The reality is, not every data source is on its best behavior. Some sources are basically chaos in a spreadsheet. And that matters because about 60% of pipeline errors trace back to issues you could have spotted at this stage. That number isn't just a scare tactic, it comes from internal studies that track the most common pain points in failed data projects inside Fabric. Copilot plays the messy detective for you. It doesn't just surface problems, it tells you why they're a problem, and crucially, what to do about them before you waste days stuck in the pipeline troubleshooting loop. A lot of tools out there will tell you what's wrong after you hit run and everything blows up. Copilot takes a smarter approach by proposing what to do next. For example, it'll flag if your IDs are stored as text in one place and numbers in another, then recommend converting them to a common type before you ever hit a join statement. It also nudges you toward best practices that don't always make the top of your mind, like suggesting you normalize certain tables or use specific ingestion formats that preserve column fidelity. These are the kinds of details that usually take trial and error or a stack of Stack Overflow searches to get right. Copilot effectively short circuits that cycle and pushes you toward cleaner, more usable data from the start. Sometimes the surprises are actually helpful. It's not just about cleaning, but optimizing your data as it comes in. For larger data sets, Copilot offers up partitioning strategies, maybe breaking up your sales data by region instead of stuffing everything into one table. This isn't just a formatting tweak. Partitioned data can speed up model refreshes, reduce query times, and spare you a lot of back-end headaches. We're talking tangible performance gains that you might have completely overlooked if you'd gone the manual route. And instead of just showing you a grid of data in preview mode, Copilot gives you a peek into how those tweaks would impact your future data model. You see a visual mock-up of potential relationships, cardinalities, and even a summary of predicted data quality after changes are applied. Approaching your data cleanup this way doesn't just remove one headache, it changes the downstream process. When the intake is smooth, the transformations you apply later are faster and more effective. Less time is spent on figuring out why a join failed or why your Power BI visuals show blank everywhere. You're not just sidestepping bugs, you're prepping your data for smarter adaptive processing in every layer that follows. Using Copilot right from the beginning means more accurate models, fewer last-minute surprises, and pipelines that actually make sense end to end. There's a clear payoff. Dialing Copilot into your intake stage builds a foundation for every decision you make downstream. Instead of fixing mistakes after the fact, you see and solve them when they matter most. And that means when it's time to transform and model your data, you're starting from a place of strength, not a scramble to repair everything that slipped through. Which brings us to what happens after the intake, the messy middle. This is where Copilot moves from smart suggestions to hands-on transformation, automatically shaping and refining your data with the same level of insight. Turning data chaos into clarity, Copilot's transformation engine. Now that your data's coming in clean, the real grind begins. The transformation layer is where most projects stumble, not because the tools are lacking, but because matching business logic to a mess of tables gets tedious fast. Think about every time you've loaded data, only to spend the next hour dragging fields around, renaming columns that make no sense, and writing formulas from memory. We've all sat there with a dozen join conditions open, second guessing whether that transaction date is actually last purchase or just an import timestamp. And if you've built even a single Power BI model, you know how a missing relationship or a mismatched data type can ripple straight through to every report and dashboard after. What Copilot does differently is pull you out of that trap of endless trial and error. It watches how you're shaping the data, what columns you merge, which tables you join, where you add those hard-to-document DAX calculations, and it offers alternatives, sometimes before you've even realized you need them. Imagine you're putting together a report for the finance team. You've linked transactional data with your customer master, but the numbers still don't add up right. Instead of trawling through lookup tables, Copilot suggests aggregating sales by region, not just by month, and then spits out a ready-to-use DAX measure for year-over-year growth. You don't have to memorize or debug the formula. It appears as a suggestion, complete with explanations about what's driving the calculation. There's a nagging worry that Copilot might oversimplify things or that it'll miss a subtle rule you've ironed out with a business partner over 3 long meetings. That's a valid concern. AI isn't a mind reader, and sometimes the first draft suggestion is too broad, missing that, say, one product line shouldn't be included in a given calculation. The longer you use Copilot, though, the tighter those recommendations get. The system asks for feedback anytime you revise or reject one of its suggestions, so the next time you build a similar model, it remembers the nuance. It gradually learns what really matters for your org versus generic assumptions. The back and forth turns into a collaboration rather than a one-off hint. Actual user data backs this up. In the last year, studies have shown that AI-generated DAX measures in Fabric are now matching the accuracy and performance of formulas written by experienced BI developers, at least for standard business tasks like running totals, percent growth, and segment filtering. Where a new analyst might spend hours troubleshooting why a total return measure breaks during year transitions, Copilot's templates for these scenarios have been tested across massive data sets and unusual cases. That doesn't mean every formula is perfect, but the floor for quality has risen dramatically. Where Copilot really sets itself apart isn't in just automating the basics. It spots performance issues in your steps and calls them out. If you're chaining together 5 queries when 2 would do, or if your joins are out of order and dragging down refresh times, it flags those as bottlenecks. You'll get nudges to merge queries or resequence steps for efficiency, not just correctness. These are the little things that usually only come up after your model hits a wall or you get calls about slow dashboards. Copilot puts those warnings front and center so you're not left guessing why your workspace crawls when the data grows. One side of data transformation that gets overlooked is documentation. The more hands touch a model, the more brittle and mysterious it becomes, especially if you're moving fast and don't take time to annotate steps or write up notes on why a filter exists. Copilot steps in here too. As you accept or customize transformation steps, it generates a readable log of changes, captures your reasoning behind tweaks, and stores it as metadata inside the model. Colleagues jumping in later don't have to reverse engineer the intent behind each transformation. They see the logic and business rule in plain language. If you've ever had to defend a calculated column to an auditor, you know the pain of digging up old project notes. Copilot's auto-documentation means you can pull a quick explanation for any change, complete with a version history. This isn't just a convenience, it can shave days off the process when your models need to be reviewed or shared with someone new. The ultimate effect, you're no longer bogged down in syntax and workarounds. Instead, those hours spent puzzling through one-off issues get redirected into refining the model's business value, asking sharper questions, experimenting with segmentation approaches, or testing new KPIs. By the time you press publish, the bulk of the grunt work has been handled or at least flagged by Copilot, leaving you to focus on the decisions that actually move the business forward. This leads right into the piece that trips up even seasoned analysts, visualizing the data in a way that delivers answers instead of just adding clutter. Building out the measures and cleaning up logic is one piece. Translating those numbers into visuals that support action is a whole different challenge. That's where Copilot's next round of suggestions make a noticeable difference. From numbers to narratives, Copilot's visual suggestions in Power BI. Building out clean, logical models in Fabric gets you partway there, but let's be honest, most dashboards end up collecting dust because the visuals don't speak to what your audience actually cares about. There's this old habit where people just let Power BI throw some bar charts onto a page, hoping one of them will impress a director enough to spark a question. But when you watch how leadership teams scroll past report tabs with deadpan expressions, you start to see the problem. It's not that there isn't data, it's that the visuals don't connect with the business questions people are actually asking. That's where Copilot steps in. And for once, it's not just playing catch up. Instead of tossing generic visuals into your report, Copilot sits on top of your model and runs a scan. It reads not just your fields, but the relationships between them, your calculated measures, and the layers you've stacked up through your pipeline. This is where things shift. For example, say you're assembling a sales report for leadership. You have region, product, and profit measures, and leadership doesn't want another basic line chart that looks like every other report from the past year. Copilot processes your structure and suggests a waterfall chart to explain how each cost and revenue factor contributes to overall profit, so the breakdown tells a story instead of just stacking bars. For sales by geography, instead of another cluster of columns, you get a recommendation for a map visual that highlights where performance is outpacing goals, not just where sales are highest in raw numbers. There's always a question here. Is Copilot giving you something genuinely impactful or just slapping a shiny skin over the same old data? What's different is the layer of explanation you get. When Copilot drops in a suggested visual, it doesn't stop at here's a waterfall chart. It spells out why the waterfall is effective, maybe because your dataset shows multiple additive and subtractive values, so the chart structure directly reflects the journey of profit rather than hiding detail behind a summary total. For a map, Copilot can point out that your model includes geographic fields with direct relationships to sales metrics, making a spatial layout more useful than a traditional table. A lot of reporting tools just let the user guess what will look good, then leave you with a dashboard that's technically correct but not all that insightful. Copilot meets you halfway, identifying which visuals match not just the field type, but the direction of analysis. That extra push can be the difference between a report that gets referenced in meetings and one that's quietly ignored. There's research backing this up. Studies tracking Power BI user sessions show that integrating Copilot's visual suggestions leads to faster completion of the report design phase, sometimes cutting time by up to 40%. More interesting, engagement with those reports actually goes up because end users see something tailored to their needs instead of a wall of sameness. Reports built with Copilot's input also get shared more often internally, suggesting that people trust the insights just a little more. Now, even with all these recommendations, Copilot's not just stacking up visuals for the sake of variety. It does a little triage as well. Say you've dropped in 10 segments on a pie chart or built a table with so many rows the numbers blur together. Copilot flags those choices as problematic. Instead, it might prompt you to break out a bar chart for clearer comparisons or use a decomposition tree to drill down on an outlier that gets lost in a noisy slice of pie. That means Copilot is protecting you from those common pitfalls where a slick visual actually hides what matters or worse, leads someone to the wrong conclusion. Formatting matters a lot more than most people think, and this is one of those areas Copilot doesn't overlook. Maybe your axis scaling is masking trends, making changes look flat, when in fact they matter to the business. Or perhaps your color palette fails accessibility guidelines, making it harder for some users to see differences in data points. Copilot not only suggests formatting tweaks, like fixing axis, adjusting data labels, or shifting to a high contrast palette, but also explains why those choices matter. These nudges lead to visuals that aren't just compliant with standards, but are actually more readable and perform better across devices. There are stories surfacing from users who tried out suggestions they would have skipped One user working through a regional sales model saw Copilot recommend a decomposition tree instead of a flat summary. Not only did that surface a missed anomaly, a region that looked average in the summary but spiked in one category, it actually kicked off a project to fix a sales allocation error that might have gone undetected for another quarter. The takeaway is sometimes the best visual isn't the obvious one. Copilot's engine learns the relationships in your model and the intent behind your KPIs, giving you a shot at surfacing things you didn't even know to look for. So these visual suggestions aren't just about making things prettier for a meeting. They're about constructing views that spark conversation, point out issues, and directly support real business decisions. The model's groundwork means nothing unless people actually use your dashboards to act. As you start seeing these tailored visuals and clearer formatting, you get more than engagement, you get action. Next up, there's the learning curve that doesn't just affect Copilot, but also you. The feedback loop that turns your data modeling workflow into something sharper over time. The feedback loop, training Copilot and your own data IQ. Most people see Copilot as a suggestion machine. It gives you recommendations. You either take them or you pass. But if you scratch the surface, the relationship is a bit more complicated and frankly smarter than a one-way street. Every single time you send feedback to Copilot, whether you're accepting that new DAX formula or overriding a suggested column combination, you're not just tuning the AI, you're actually rethinking your own logic with every tweak. Sort of like that moment when you change an autopilot's route and are forced to double check your map. Fabric's Copilot isn't writing notes on a blank slate, it's actively absorbing your workflow and adapting, which ends up shifting how you approach decisions after a while. Picture this, you've spent half a day shaping a pretty standard sales model, and just as you go to accept Copilot's recommended total profit measure, it tosses in a calculation you know doesn't match your reporting standard. Maybe it missed an exclusion for partner discounts, or it bundled in a promo that should be separated out. You change the formula. Instantly, Copilot asks for context, a short description or checkmark about the rule you applied. The key here is that input doesn't disappear into the abyss. The next time you build a model with similar data, Copilot remembers no more assuming all revenue is actual profit, and certainly no more forgetting to leave out partner discounts on quarterly reports. So your feedback actually loops back into every later suggestion in a way most people wouldn't expect. The process isn't just about efficiency, it's about accuracy, version after version. And there's a hesitation point people have to get past. The idea that letting an AI watch and learn from your corrections is risky makes sense. If you tell Copilot the wrong thing, does it anchor itself to a mistake? What if it picks up a clumsy workaround that you use just to hit a deadline and then makes it gospel? The anxiety isn't far-fetched. Organizations don't exactly want their business logic drifting unless they can track how it changes. But here's the thing, Copilot's design in Fabric means it never stops asking for input when there's a change or a rejection. That running commentary, the little reasons and notes, get recorded as part of the feedback cycle. Over time, this log helps steer its recommendations so they land closer to your specific business rules, not just the generic defaults. The more you interact, the more business specific the AI becomes. And if you need to roll back a habit, it's tracked and explainable. The result is an evolving engine that grows more flexible, not more brittle. A team I worked with started out ignoring half of Copilot's suggestions. Their first few models were standard issue, basic joins, a few bland visuals, nothing that really jumped off the page. But as they slowly started responding, rejecting visuals, reworking DAX for new product lines, clarifying why a certain transformation step mattered, something shifted. Within a month, Copilot wasn't just suggesting less generic output, it was lining up visuals that mirrored the company's KPIs and even prompting transformations that matched new business processes they'd adopted. Their pipeline actually sped up too because the repeated corrections fed Copilot information that forced it out of default mode and into a more customized pattern. By tying feedback loops to the real-world needs of their business, they closed the gap between good enough models and results that stood up to serious review. It's not just anecdotes driving this point. Studies are tracking how actively working with Copilot's feedback cycle moves the needle. Teams that give regular feedback, whether positive, negative, or even just little explanatory nudges, see modeling error rates drop. Reporting becomes more relevant, and accuracy in calculated measures improves. The latest numbers show that engaged teams are hitting about a 30% bump in overall reporting accuracy and precision when compared to groups who only passively accept or reject suggestions without adding context. The implication here isn't magic, it's targeted learning through interaction. The more Copilot sees and the more you force it to explain or refine, the closer your data models track with business intent. Unexpectedly, this feedback system isn't just training the AI. More users are reporting that reviewing and correcting Copilot's output is actually tuning their own approach to modeling. That sounds odd, but you see it in the way people start to anticipate issues, spot hidden logic flaws, or even add documentation where they never bothered before. Instead of just rubber stamping whatever comes up, teams get into the habit of challenging recommendations, editing formulas, and thinking more deliberately about why certain visuals work and others don't. It's become common to see people pick up modeling best practices almost by accident, habits they credit to the act of explaining corrections or defending a data logic tweak to Copilot. This isn't about automating yourself out of a job, it's about nudging your data instincts forward as the system matures alongside you. So, using Copilot isn't a passive experience, it's a partnership that sharpens both the tool and the user over time. The more you invest in feedback, the tighter your models, reports, and dashboards become. Your workflow moves from basic acceptance to active design, and the results reflect choices instead of defaults. If you're strategic about it, Copilot ends up serving not just as an efficiency booster, but as a quiet engine for skill building inside your team and across your projects. Which brings us back to why Copilot shouldn't just be another tool you ignore. Actively shaping it is what actually sets it apart for Fabric workflows. Now, with all that in mind, you might be wondering how to use these ideas practically to challenge your own model building habits. If you think Copilot is just about speed, you're missing where it actually changes things. You're not just automating busy work, you're improving the entire system. Each time you use Copilot, your models, your reports, and even your approach to data start shifting. It's less about replacing decisions and more about sharpening your instincts, one suggestion at a time. Don't just take Copilot's advice, shape it with your feedback. Watch how your insights get smarter and challenge your old routines. If you learned something new about your workflow today, drop it in the comments. Sometimes the biggest change comes from that next Copilot prompt.